I came home to silence. The kind that wasn't peaceful but empty, hollow. The house was spotless, too spotless. Her favorite vase was missing from the table. A few picture frames were gone. My gut twisted, a deep, gnawing sensation clawing at the edges of my sanity. She was gone. I walked through the house, every step echoing too loudly in the quiet. The closet? Half empty. The bathroom? Her perfume still lingered, but her essentials were missing. Then I saw it, an envelope on the kitchen counter. My name written in the delicate curves of her handwriting. My fingers were numb as I ripped it open. James. I need time. My parents want me home. I'm sorry if this hurts you, but I need to think. Please understand. Please don't come after me. Lisa. That was it. No explanation. No fight. No tearful goodbye. My mind went cold. I wasn't an idiot. I knew what this was. Women don't just leave their husbands to think. They leave because they have somewhere else to go. Someone else. I grabbed my keys, my pulse hammering. There was only one place she could be, her parents' house. I had given everything to this woman, and she thought she could just walk away? No, not like this. I was going to find out the truth, and I was going to make them all regret thinking I was a man they could betray. The drive to her parents' house felt like a fever dream. I wasn't thinking, just moving. My hands clenched around the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Lisa's family had never liked me. Too rough around the edges, they said. Too cold. Her father once told me, a man like you won't ever truly make my daughter happy. I had laughed in his face back then. Now, I wasn't laughing. Their house loomed ahead, big, white, pristine. A place where lies could be wrapped in politeness and deceit was hidden behind warm smiles. I parked on the street and walked up the driveway, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't even knock. I just walked in. The living room was full, Lisa, her parents, and a man I had never seen before. Tall, polished, wearing a navy blue suit like he had walked straight out of some corporate brochure. He was sitting too close to my wife. And Lisa? She looked guilty. James, her mother said sharply, standing up. You can't just barge in here. Who is he? I cut her off, my eyes locked onto the stranger. Lisa stood, her hands shaking. James, please don't do this here. Who is he? The man stood up, adjusting his tie. He had that fake, rehearsed smile I hated. The kind of man who had never had to fight for anything in his life. Daniel Carter, he said, extending a hand like this was a business deal. Lisa's father introduced us a few weeks ago. I didn't shake his hand. I didn't even look at it. My gaze snapped back to Lisa. A few weeks ago? I repeated slowly. My voice was calm. Deadly calm. Lisa's throat bobbed as she swallowed. James, I just needed someone to talk to. I've been confused. Her father stepped in, trying to sound reasonable. James, you and Lisa have had problems for a while. We just want what's best for her. What's best for her? Understanding hit me like a freight train. They had been planning this. They wanted me out. They wanted him in. I exhaled slowly, stepping back. So that's how it is, I murmured, nodding to myself. You leave me, and before the dust even settles, they have a replacement lined up. Lisa flinched. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said. And you're too much of a coward to admit it. Silence. I turned my eyes back to Daniel. He looked confident. Smug. Maybe he thought he had already won. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I let out a small chuckle, shaking my head. You know what? Fine. You can have her. Lisa's mouth fell open. James? I turned for the door, but not before looking at her father one last time. Enjoy your new son-in-law, I said, my voice laced with venom. Let's see how long he lasts. And with that, I walked out. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I drove home in silence. No music. No distractions. Just the sound of the engine humming beneath me, the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. They thought I'd just walk away. That I'd accept this humiliation like some beaten dog. No. I wasn't the kind of man who begged. I wasn't the kind of man who fought for a woman who had already decided to replace me. But I was the kind of man who made sure no one forgot what they did to me. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. My house, our house, felt foreign now, like a tomb of memories that meant nothing anymore. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the walls, every trace of her, it all disgusted me. I wasn't going to live in this graveyard. So I started cleaning house. I gathered everything that belonged to Lisa, her clothes, her books, her jewelry, anything that smelled like her, anything that reminded me she had once been here. I packed them up in boxes, but I didn't tape them shut. She would need to see what I had done. Next, I went to our shared accounts. Bank, credit cards, subscriptions. She hadn't even had the decency to tell me she was leaving. So why should I have the decency to make it easy for her? Within minutes, I locked her out of everything. Then I called a locksmith. Change every lock, I told the guy when he arrived. Front, back, windows, everything. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded and got to work. While he did that, I picked up my phone and sent Lisa a message. Your things are in boxes. Come get them tomorrow before noon. After that, they go in the trash. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew she'd see it. I also knew she'd be stupid enough to think she could talk her way out of this. That was her mistake. I had already made my decision. This wasn't about saving a marriage. This was about revenge. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep was for men who still had peace, for men who weren't plotting. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling nothing but cold clarity. Lisa had made her choice, and now it was my turn. Morning came too quickly, the pale light of dawn creeping through the windows like an uninvited guest. I pushed myself up and grabbed a cup of coffee, the bitterness matching the taste in my mouth. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was temporary. What I felt now was something deeper, something more calculated. This wasn't just about Lisa. It was about the principle of the thing. She had walked away like our years together meant nothing, and her parents had set her up with another man like I was a placeholder, a warm body to be replaced when a better option came along. Worse, Daniel, the other man, had looked me in the eye, shook my hand, and smiled as if I was the fool in this situation. He thought he'd won. They all did. I let the coffee burn my throat as I sat back and thought. Lisa was expecting a conversation. She was expecting me to be emotional, to plead, to shout, maybe even to lash out. That's what cheaters always expected. It gave them a reason to justify what they did. They needed the betrayed spouse to be unreasonable so they could say, see? This is why I left. This is why I had no choice. But I wasn't going to give her that. By 10 o'clock, I had everything in place. Her things were packed and sitting neatly in the garage, right by the driveway. I had canceled her car insurance, shut down her phone line, and made sure the last of our shared utilities were transferred to my name alone. If she wanted to keep any of it, she'd have to beg me for access. At exactly 10:45, a car pulled up outside. I didn't look through the window. I already knew who it was. Lisa knocked softly. I let her stand outside for a full minute before opening the door. She looked different, like she hadn't slept either. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she was wearing a sweater I had bought her 2 Christmases ago. For a second, I almost laughed at the irony of it. James, she said, voice uncertain. Your things are in the garage, I replied, stepping aside. She hesitated, glancing at me like she expected more. Can we talk? No. Her mouth opened slightly, surprised at how flatly I had said it. I didn't want it to be like this. I let out a small, humorless chuckle. Didn't want what to be like this, Lisa? The part where you packed your bags and left in the middle of the night? Or the part where your parents had another guy waiting for you like I was a mistake they couldn't wait to fix? She flinched. That was good. I wanted her to feel that. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. But you did. She looked away, ashamed, but I wasn't interested in her guilt. Guilt was useless to me. It didn't undo what she had done. It didn't erase the image of Daniel Carter sitting next to her like he already owned her. I just needed space, she continued, forcing herself to meet my eyes. I needed to think. Things between us haven't been good for a while, James. You know that. I folded my arms. So instead of talking to me, you ran to your parents and let them pick a new husband for you? Her eyes widened. It's not like that. Then tell me, Lisa, what is it like? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because there was no good explanation. No excuse that wouldn't make her sound worse. I didn't let her struggle for long. You can stop pretending. I already know everything. She stiffened. What do you mean? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I know about Daniel. I know your father introduced you to before you left. I know you've been talking to him for weeks. Maybe even longer. Her lips parted, her breath hitching. She was caught, and she knew it. I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. The only thing I don't know is whether he was the reason you left, or just a convenient excuse after the fact. She swallowed hard. James, I held up a hand. I don't care. That stopped her. I continued, voice steady. I don't care why you did it. I don't care what you were feeling. The only thing that matters now is what happens next. A flicker of fear crossed her face. What does that mean? I gestured toward the garage. It means your things are outside, and after today, you and I have nothing to talk about. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel anything. No sympathy. No nostalgia. Just a sense of finality. She wiped at her face. I don't want to lose you completely. You already did. She let out a shaky breath, nodding slowly. Maybe she had expected this. Maybe some part of her had hoped I would fight for her. But I wasn't going to fight for someone who had already chosen to walk away. She turned and walked toward the garage, her steps slow, like she was waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. I watched as she loaded the boxes into the trunk of her car. Then, just before getting in, she looked back at me one last time. I did love you, James, she whispered. I still do. I tilted my head. Then why did you leave? She had no answer. She just lowered her gaze and got in her car. I waited until she pulled away before shutting the door. Then, I walked into my office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Daniel Carter thought he could step into my life and take what was mine. Lisa's parents thought they could erase me like I was nothing. They all thought I would accept this. They were wrong. I cracked my knuckles and got to work. Let the real game begin. I spent the next few days in absolute silence, moving through my house like a ghost. The walls felt different now. The air felt heavier. Lisa was gone, but her absence was still a presence, lingering in the corners like a shadow. I had no interest in grieving her. I wasn't the kind of man who sat around licking his wounds. No, I had other plans that would make sure she, Daniel, and every single person who thought they could erase me regretted ever underestimating me. The first step was gathering information. Revenge wasn't about reacting, it was about control. And control came from knowing every little secret your enemies wanted to keep hidden. I started with Daniel, the man who had been hand-delivered into my wife's life like some kind of perfect replacement. Who was he, really? I didn't just want the surface details. I wanted everything. Within hours, I had his social media accounts pulled up. Every post, every connection, every job title. He worked in finance, predictable. A corporate guy with a crisp suit and a carefully curated online presence. But people like him always had cracks beneath the polished surface. And all I had to do was find them. I spent the next 2 days digging. It didn't take long before I struck gold. Daniel had secrets, just like everyone else. Buried in old forums and forgotten profiles were hints of things he didn't want people to see. His previous job ended abruptly with whispers of an internal investigation. Something about missing funds, an accounting error that somehow never made it to the police but was enough to get him quietly removed. That was interesting, but it wasn't enough. I kept going, reaching out to old colleagues, fake accounts sending casual inquiries, piecing together the kind of man he really was. And then I found it. The thing that made me lean back in my chair and smile for the first time in days. Daniel Carter had a fiancée once. Years before Lisa. A woman named Emily Whitmore. She had vanished from his life without a trace, wiped from his online presence as if she never existed. That kind of erasure didn't happen naturally. People left footprints, even when they tried to disappear. It took me another 12 hours before I found her. A private account under a different name, but still connected to mutual acquaintances. And then, a single post from years ago, buried under layers of forgotten updates. Some men don't just lie. They steal. They ruin. And they never face the consequences. I stared at the screen, feeling the pieces clicking together in my mind. I reached out to her. A simple message. You don't know me, but I think we have something in common. His name is Daniel Carter. The response came faster than I expected. A single word. Call me. I did. Emily wasn't just a woman Daniel had dated. She was a woman he had destroyed. She told me everything, her voice carrying the weight of old scars. Daniel had drained her savings, manipulated her into trusting him, then left her stranded with nothing. No evidence. No paper trail. Just the cold realization that she had been nothing more than a stepping stone to his next, better, opportunity. She had tried to warn people, but without proof, no one cared. Now, she had proof. She had emails. Documents. Records of conversations where Daniel had admitted to what he had done, things she had kept buried for years, waiting for the right moment. I told her the moment had arrived. By the time I ended the call, I knew exactly how I was going to dismantle him. Lisa might have walked away from me, but she had walked straight into the arms of a predator. And I was going to make sure she saw every single inch of the monster she had chosen. The second step of my plan was even simpler. Lisa's parents had treated me like an inconvenience, a mistake to be corrected. They thought Daniel was an upgrade. So I decided to give them a reason to regret ever interfering in my marriage. I knew their weaknesses, reputation, and money. They had built their social status carefully, their connections pristine, their names untarnished. They were the kind of people who cared deeply about what others thought of them. And that was exactly what I would use against them. I started small. Anonymous tips sent to the local financial review boards, questions about potential fraud in their business dealings. It wasn't about getting them arrested. It was about planting seeds of doubt, making people whisper. Then I moved onto their social circles. Carefully crafted messages, sent from untraceable accounts, hinting at their daughter's involvement with a man whose past was far from clean. I made sure just enough truth was mixed in to make it believable. By the time the first rumors reached them, I knew they would be scrambling. The final stage of my plan was the most personal. Lisa had said she didn't want to lose me completely. That was her mistake. She had already lost me. Now, I was going to make sure she understood exactly what that meant. I waited until she reached out. It didn't take long. A week after she took her things, she sent a message. Can we talk? Please? I let her wait for a full day before responding. Meet me at the cafe on 5th, tomorrow. 2 p.m. She arrived early. Of course she did. She was sitting at a table by the window when I walked in, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She looked up as I approached, her eyes hopeful. I sat down, leaning back, watching her. Thank you for meeting me, she said softly. I didn't answer. Just let the silence stretch between us until she shifted uncomfortably. Finally, she exhaled. James, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I hurt you. I tilted my head. Is that why you're here? To ease your guilt? No, she said quickly. I wanted to see you. To make sure you're okay. I laughed under my breath. I'm more than okay. She blinked, thrown off by my response. I heard some things. About Daniel. About my parents. They're worried. Good, I said simply. Her breath caught. James, did you do something? I leaned in slightly, just enough to let her feel the weight of my words. I didn't do anything. I just made sure people saw the truth. She swallowed. I think I made a mistake. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Yes, you did. Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, she looked afraid, and I let her sit with that fear. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Lisa sat across from me, her fingers tightening around the ceramic cup like it was the only thing keeping her steady. She had always been composed, always the kind of woman who measured her words carefully before speaking. But now she looked small, uncertain, afraid. I let the silence settle between us, let it stretch long enough for her to squirm under its weight. I don't understand, she finally whispered. I tilted my head slightly, watching her. What don't you understand, Lisa? She swallowed hard. Daniel. My parents. Everything is falling apart. I didn't smile, though I wanted to. She had no idea how much worse it was going to get. She exhaled shakily. There are rumors about Daniel at his job. Someone sent an anonymous tip about his past. He swears it's not true, but now his company is looking into it. She bit her lip, like she wasn't sure she should say the next part. In my father's business, investors are pulling out. They won't tell me why. I said nothing, just watched as realization started to settle in her eyes. She wasn't stupid. She knew. She just didn't want to believe it. James, her voice was softer now. Did you do this? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I told you, I murmured. I didn't do anything. I just made sure the truth came to light. Her breath hitched, and she shook her head, like she was trying to process everything at once. Why? That question almost made me laugh. Why? Did she really need to ask? After everything they had done? After she had walked away from me like I was disposable? After her parents had treated me like an obstacle? After Daniel had sat across from me with that smug little grin, thinking he had one? I let out a quiet breath and leaned back. Because you all thought I was weak, I said. You thought I would just take it. That I'd disappear quietly and let you rewrite my life like I was never in it. I shook my head. I'm not that kind of man, Lisa. And I don't forgive betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes, and she wiped at them quickly, trying to hold on to whatever dignity she had left. I never wanted this. I studied her. Did you think you'd just leave me and get your perfect little fairy tale ending? She closed her eyes, shaking her head. No. I thought maybe we could still be in each other's lives. That we could move past this. That was her mistake. Thinking there was anything left to salvage. Thinking I was the kind of man who could watch her build a life with someone else and accept it. No, Lisa, I said quietly. You don't get to keep pieces of me. You chose your side. Now you live with it. She flinched like I had struck her. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table for the coffee I never drank. This is the last time we talk, I said. There's nothing left to say. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Because deep down, she knew. She had lost me. Completely. I walked out of that cafe without looking back. The next few days passed in a blur. I watched from a distance as everything unfolded exactly as I had planned. Daniel's company put him on indefinite leave while they investigated his past discrepancies. The investors who pulled out of Lisa's father's business weren't just scared, they were angry. Because I had made sure the right people knew that there were whispers of financial misconduct. Even if nothing was ever proven, doubt was a poison that spread fast in their circles. I didn't need to destroy them completely. Just shake their world enough that they felt it. That they knew what it was like to lose control. And Lisa? She was unraveling. I saw it in the way she stopped posting online, in the way mutual friends told me she had gone quiet, withdrawn. Her perfect new life wasn't so perfect anymore. I could have stopped there. I could have let that be enough. But there was still one last loose end. Daniel. I had one final play. One final strike that would make sure he never forgot me. I waited until the pressure on him was at its peak, when his company was breathing down his neck, when his reputation was crumbling. Then, I sent him a message. A simple one. We need to talk. One chance. Don't waste it. He responded within minutes. Where? I gave him the location, a quiet bar just outside the city. Neutral ground. He agreed. Of course he did. He was desperate. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a booth with a drink he hadn't touched. His suit was still perfect, his hair still carefully styled, but there was tension in his shoulders, in the way he kept glancing around like he expected an ambush. I slid into the seat across from him, meeting his gaze. You look nervous, Daniel. His jaw tightened. I don't know what game you're playing, but it... I chuckled. This isn't a game. It's a lesson. His fingers curled around his glass, but he didn't drink. You have no idea what you've done, he said, voice low. I tilted my head. Oh, I think I do. I leaned in slightly. You thought you could step into my life, take what was mine, and walk away clean. But that's not how the world works. His expression darkened. Lisa isn't yours. She made her own choice. I smiled, slow and sharp. Yes, she did. And now she's living with it. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. So what do you want? Is this a threat? I let the silence stretch before answering. No, Daniel. This is mercy. He frowned. I leaned forward. You walk away. From Lisa. From this city. From everything. You disappear before the rest of your past catches up with you. His eyes narrowed. And if I don't? I smiled again. Then I release everything I have on you. To the police. To your company. To anyone who will listen. His face went pale. Because he knew I wasn't bluffing. He swallowed hard, glancing away. And Lisa? I shrugged. She's your problem now. But if I were you, I wouldn't be around when she realizes what kind of man you really are. He exhaled shakily. I could see the gears turning in his head, weighing his options. But we both knew he didn't have any. After a long pause, he nodded. Fine. I sat back. Good choice. I finished my drink, stood up, and left him sitting there, staring at the table like a man who had just seen his future crumble. By the next morning, Daniel was gone. Resigned from his job. Disconnected his social media. Lisa's father was still trying to put out fires, but it was too late. The damage had been done. And me? I was finally free. The past was behind me. But I knew one thing for sure. Lisa would never forget me. And that was the best revenge of all. Days passed, then weeks. The storm I had unleashed settled into a quiet wreckage, the kind that didn't make headlines but still left lives in shambles. Daniel was gone, just as I expected. He hadn't even tried to fight back, because men like him never did when they realized they were up against someone they couldn't manipulate. Lisa's father was still clawing at what was left of his business, desperately trying to salvage what he could. And Lisa, well, Lisa had finally learned what it meant to lose. I had expected her to reach out again, but she didn't. Not a text. Not a call. She had finally understood. There was nothing left to save. I focused on myself. The house, the one we had built together, had become a ghost of a home, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. So I sold it, packed up what mattered, threw out what didn't, and left it behind like a shedskin. For the first time in years, I was free. I had just settled into my new place, a quiet apartment in a high-rise overlooking the city, when the knock came. Soft. Hesitant. I opened the door, and there she was. Lisa. She looked different. Not in the way that time changed people, but in the way regret did. Her face was thinner, her eyes hollow, her shoulders slumped as if carrying something far heavier than she had ever expected. "James," she said, voice almost a whisper. I didn't say anything, just leaned against the doorframe, waiting. She swallowed hard. "Can I come in?" For a moment, I considered it. Considered letting her step into my new life, just to show her how little space she had in it now. But I wasn't interested in theatrics. "No," I said simply. Her breath hitched, but she nodded like she had expected that. She hesitated. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." I gave her a long look, then smirked. "No, you don't." She flinched, caught. She had come here not for me, but for herself. Tease whatever guilt still gnawed at her. She sighed. "I made a mistake." I chuckled under my breath. "Yeah, Lisa. You did." She licked her lips, shifting on her feet. I left Daniel." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out, he wasn't who I thought he was." I tilted my head. "Or maybe he was exactly who you thought he was. You just liked the fantasy more." She looked away. She had no argument. After a long silence, she met my eyes again. "I don't expect you to forgive me, James. I just wanted you to know. I regret everything." I stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Good." That was all I said before I closed the door in her face. I heard her exhale sharply, then footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't watch her go. That was the last time I saw Lisa. The wounds she left behind had long since turned to scars, the kind that didn't ache anymore. I had spent too much time in the past, too much energy on vengeance. And now, for the first time, I was ready to look forward. I started traveling. I reconnected with old friends. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, shaping it into something that was completely mine. No shadows of Lisa. No ghosts of the man I used to be. One night, I found myself at a bar, a different one from where I had met Daniel. This place was quieter, more refined. And that was where I met her. Not Lisa. Not a replacement. Just someone new. She smiled at me from across the bar, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled back. Years later, I received an email. It was from Lisa. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. It was short. Simple. "I heard you got married. I hope she knows how lucky she is. I hope she treats you better than I did. I'm happy for you. I truly am. Lisa." I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the email. Lisa had spent so much time trying to rewrite our story in a way that made her feel less guilty. But there was only one truth. She had left me for something she thought was better. And I had walked away, refusing to let her drag me down with her. In the end, she had lost everything. And I had won. Because the best revenge was simply moving on.